My name is Carl, and at 32, I've built my life around financial stability as a respected advisor working from my home in suburban Boston. Last year, I reluctantly opened my doors to my recently divorced sister, Stefania, and her 2-year-old son, Trevor. Everything was manageable until that Tuesday when Trevor asked to borrow my credit card for snacks at the corner store. "I just used your card for snacks," he casually mentioned upon returning. The next morning, I stared in disbelief at my banking app. Lumiran, 300, gone overnight. When I confronted them, my sister just shrugged. Kids will be kids. Before I continue this story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. If you want more true stories about family betrayal and the moments that test our boundaries, growing up in a modest neighborhood outside of Boston, my parents instilled in me the importance of financial responsibility from an early age. My father worked as a high school mathematics teacher, while my mother managed a small local bookstore. They weren't wealthy by any measure, but they understood the value of every dollar earned. I can still hear my father's voice. "Carl, always save for a rainy day because storms come when you least expect them." Those lessons shaped me into who I am today. I worked diligently through high school, maintaining a part-time job at the local hardware store while keeping my grades high enough to earn a partial scholarship to Boston University. College wasn't easy. I balanced full-time studies with 2 part-time jobs, often surviving on ramen noodles and coffee just to make ends meet. But those struggles taught me resilience and strengthened my commitment to financial security. After graduating with a degree in finance, I spent 8 years climbing the corporate ladder at a prestigious investment firm in downtown Boston. The hours were brutal, but I saved aggressively, lived well below my means, and invested wisely. But tragically, I had built enough of a client base to branch out on my own as an independent financial advisor. Working from home gave me freedom and control over my schedule while still doing what I loved, helping people secure their financial futures. My 3-bedroom colonial in a quiet suburban neighborhood represented everything I had worked for: stability, independence, and security. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, paid for with years of careful planning and disciplined saving. I designed one bedroom as my home office, kept another for occasional guests, and enjoyed the peace of living alone. My life wasn't exciting by most standards, but it was exactly what I wanted: predictable, organized, and financially sound. Then there was Stephanie, my younger sister by 2 years, and my complete opposite in every way possible. Where I was cautious, she was impulsive. Where I saved, she spent. Where I planned, she lived moment to moment. Even as children, these differences were apparent. I would carefully save my allowance for weeks to buy something special while Stephanie would spend hers immediately, and then sweet-talk our parents into advances on future allowances. As we grew older, these patterns only intensified. Stephanie dropped out of community college after just 1 semester, claiming it was too restrictive for her creative spirit. She bounced between retail jobs, never staying anywhere longer than a few months before getting bored or having conflicts with management. Her financial disasters became a regular family affair. I remember the first time I bailed her out. She was 23 and called me sobbing about being evicted from her apartment. She owed 3 months of back rent. Armavit. Seabay. Despite being a struggling graduate student myself, I emptied my emergency fund to help her after she promised to be more responsible. 6 months later, she called again, this time with outstanding utility bills and another eviction notice. The pattern continued through her 20s credit card debt, payday loans, car repossessions, each time with tearful promises that this time would be different. When Stephanie met James at 27, I hoped marriage might finally settle her. For a while, it seemed to work. James had a stable job as a construction manager, and they bought a modest house in a working-class neighborhood about 40 minutes from my place. Trevor was born a year later, and for the first time, Stephanie seemed to find some purpose and stability, but old habits die hard. While James worked overtime to support the family, Stephanie resumed her impulsive spending, designer clothes, expensive salon treatments, impulsive vacations they couldn't afford. From snippets of conversation at family gatherings, I gathered that their financial situation had become increasingly strained. With James working longer hours while Stephanie complained about being trapped in suburban motherhood, the divorce didn't surprise anyone in the family. After 14 years of marriage, James finally reached his breaking point when he discovered Stephanie had secretly taken out a second mortgage on their house to pay off credit card debt and then maxed out the cards again. The legal proceedings were ugly, with James presenting years of financial evidence that painted Stephanie as recklessly irresponsible. She lost the house entirely due to missed mortgage payments, and the judge awarded her only minimal alimony given her pattern of financial misconduct. That's when Stephanie showed up at my doorstep one rainy April evening, Trevor sulking behind her, both of them surrounded by hastily packed suitcases. Her story tumbled out between sobs. They had nowhere to go, no money for a security deposit, and couldn't possibly stay with our aging parents who lived in a small retirement community condo. It'll just be for a month, Carl, just until I get back on my feet, she promised, her mascara running down her cheeks. I've already applied for jobs, and James will start paying child support soon. We won't be any trouble. Looking at Trevor, who, despite his mother's flaws, was still my nephew, I reluctantly agreed. I showed them to the guest bedroom, helped Trevor set up an air mattress in my home office, and established what I thought were clear house rules. They would contribute to groceries and utilities, respect my work schedule and privacy, and actively work toward finding their own place. The first few weeks weren't terrible. Stephanie interviewed for several retail positions, and Trevor seemed well-behaved, if somewhat quiet and withdrawn. But as 1 month stretched into 2, then 3, the warning signs began to appear. Stephanie's job search became less intense. She began borrowing $20 here, $40 there always, with vague promises to pay me back when things turn around. I started noticing small, unauthorized charges on my credit card. Fast food orders, movie rentals, online subscriptions I hadn't signed up for. When confronted, Stephanie always had an excuse. Oh, I thought you said I could use it for groceries. Or, Trevor must have seen the card number when you ordered pizza that one time. Though aggravating, none of these charges were significant enough to create a serious conflict until that fateful Tuesday in July when everything changed. That Tuesday started like any other workday. I woke at 6:00, went for my morning run, showered, and settled into my home office by 8. I had an important client meeting that afternoon and needed to prepare a comprehensive portfolio analysis. This particular client had substantial assets, and I was hoping to demonstrate how restructuring their investments could significantly increase their returns while reducing risk. The presentation needed to be perfect. Around 1130, I was deep in spreadsheets and financial projections when Trevor knocked on my office door. Though I had a strict no interruptions rule during work hours, I waved him in, keeping my eyes on the complex calculations on my screen. Uncle Carl, can I get some money for snacks? Trevor asked, hovering in the doorway. Mom's out job hunting and I'm really hungry. I glanced at the time, realizing I'd worked through lunch and was on a tight deadline. There's plenty of food in the fridge. Trevor, make yourself a sandwich. But I really wanted some chips and maybe ice cream from the corner store. He persisted. Please. I'm so bored here all day, still focused on my work and wanting to avoid an extended conversation. I reached for my wallet and realized it was in my bedroom. Without thinking too much about it, I pulled my backup credit card from my desk drawer. Not my primary card, but one I kept for emergencies. Here, I said, handing it to him. Just go to Miller's on the corner. Zechemux. Okay. I need this back in 15 minutes. Trevor nodded eagerly. But as he turned to leave, I caught a strange expression on his face. A slight smirk that should have alarmed me. Instead, I dismissed it as teenage attitude and turned back to my work, already refocused on the task at hand. When 3:00 rolled around, I realized two things simultaneously. My client meeting was in 30 minutes, and Trevor had never returned my credit card. Annoyed but pressed for time, I decided to deal with it after my meeting. I assumed he'd probably just forgotten and was watching TV or playing video games in the living room. My video conference with the client went exceptionally well, lasting nearly 2 hours as we discussed various investment strategies in detail. When I finally emerged from my office around 5:30, I found Trevor lounging on the couch playing a video game I didn't recognize on my large-screen TV. Hey, where's my credit card? I asked, noticing he was wearing what appeared to be a new gaming headset. Slake, expensive-looking with glowing blue accents. Trevor barely glanced up from his game. It's on the kitchen counter, he said flatly. I walked to the kitchen and found the card propped against the coffee maker. You were gone a while for just getting snacks, I commented, returning to the living room. And where did you get that headset? Trevor shrugged his eyes. Never leaving the screen. I just used your card for snacks, he said in a tone so casual it was almost rehearsed. Something about his demeanor bothered me. But I was tired after a long day and still had follow-up emails to send to my client. Well, talk about this later, I said firmly, and that headset better not have been purchased with my card. Stephanie didn't return until after 8 that evening. When I asked where she'd been all day, supposedly job hunting, she gave vague answers about multiple interviews and networking opportunities without providing any specific details. She seemed distracted and quickly changed the subject to complain about how expensive apartments were and how unreasonable landlords had become with their credit check requirements. Any luck with the job search? I pressed, noticing she had no paperwork or business cards that typically accompany interviews. These things take time. Carl, she snapped, not everyone can have a perfect little career like yours. Some of us have to struggle. Sensing her defensiveness, I decided to approach the topic of Trevor's behavior instead. Trevor borrowed my credit card today for snacks, but he was gone for hours and came back with what looks like an expensive gaming headset. Do you know anything about that? Stephanie glanced toward Trevor, who was still absorbed in his game, then shrugged dismissively. He probably just went to his friend Jake's house. You know how kids lose track of time? And the headset? I persisted. Oh, that old thing? His father sent it last week, she said quickly. James is always trying to buy Trevor's affection with expensive gifts instead of actual parenting. Her explanation didn't sit right with me, but I was too exhausted to push further. I reminded myself that I had only authorized $10, and I could always check my account in the morning if I was concerned. Surely Trevor wouldn't have done anything truly inappropriate with my card. He was just 12 after all. The next morning, I woke at my usual time and followed my normal routine. After my run and shower, I settled at the kitchen table with my coffee and opened my banking app to review my accounts. A daily habit instilled by years of financial discipline. What I saw made me choke on my coffee. Multiple transactions from the previous day appeared on my backup credit card. Not just one or two small purchases, but a staggering list of charges totaling $6. Sunbay. My hand shook as I scrolled through the transactions. A gaming computer for $1. Babe. 3 separate charges at electronics warehouse totaling over $900. Digital gift cards purchased online for various gaming platforms. $500 here. $300 there. In-app purchases across multiple games. Some repeated several times. Cash withdrawals from ATMs across town, each just under the daily limit. 2 plane tickets to Orlando, Florida, totaling nearly $700. And most disturbing of all, a pending hotel reservation at a resort near Disney World for the following weekend. This wasn't the impulsive splurge of a child buying too many snacks. This was calculated, systematic theft. I stood up so abruptly that my coffee mug crashed to the floor, shattering and spilling its contents across the kitchen tiles. The noise brought both Stephanie and Trevor into the kitchen, still in their pajamas. Looking startled, "What the hell is this?" I demanded. Turning my phone screen toward them to show the endless list of transactions, Trevor immediately looked down, avoiding eye contact. But Stephanie stepped forward, glancing briefly at the screen. "What am I looking at?" "Carl?" she asked, her tone irritatingly casual. "6美元, 300 of unauthorized charges on my credit card. The one I gave Trevor for snacks yesterday," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "Care to explain?" Trevor shuffled his feet, but remained silent. Stephanie put a protective arm around his shoulders. "I'm sure there's been some mistake," she said. "Trevor would never do something like that. Would you?" Honey, Trevor mumbled something inaudible, still staring at the floor. "These charges are from yesterday afternoon," I continued, scrolling through the list. "Gaming equipment, online purchases, cash withdrawals, plane tickets to Florida in your names." "Are you seriously going to stand there and deny this?" Stephanie's expression shifted from feigned confusion to dismissive nonchalance with alarming speed. "Look, even if Trevor did use the card for a few extras, kids will be kids. Right. He probably didn't understand the value of money. You can just call the bank and explain it was a misunderstanding." I stared at her in disbelief. "A few extras. This is over $6. Ling, ling, ling. And plane tickets in your name suggest you were involved." "Too." Stephanie rolled her eyes. "Oh? Please. You're overreacting. It's just money. And we all know you can afford it. You're probably just mad because you didn't authorize it first. But honestly, Carl, you would have said no like you always do. You're so tight with money. It's ridiculous." "This isn't about being tight with money," I said, feeling my blood pressure rising. "This is theft. Stefania, plain and simple. Theft from family." She laughed incredulously. "That's rich." "Carl, family helps family. Maybe if you weren't such a penny pincher all the time, Trevor wouldn't have had to take matters into his own hands." I turned my attention to Trevor, who had retreated behind his mother. "Trevor, did you make these purchases with my card?" Before he could answer, Stephanie interjected, "Don't interrogate him like he's a criminal. He's just a child. A child who apparently knows how to make complex online purchases and ATM withdrawals." I retorted. "Trevor, I'm asking you directly. Did you use my card to make these purchases?" Trevor finally looked up, a defiant expression eerily similar to his mother's crossing his face. "You said I could use the card. Imodel. For $10 of snacks at the corner store, not for thousands in electronics and vacation plans." "Well, you should have been more specific," Stephanie cut in. "And anyway, you probably approved these charges and forgot. You're always working, barely paying attention to us. We've been cooped up in this house for months while you ignore us. Trevor deserves some fun." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only were they admitting to the theft, but they were somehow twisting it to make me the villain. In that moment, looking at Stephanie's defensive posture and Trevor's practiced innocence, I realized this wasn't an impulsive mistake. This was calculated exploitation from people who saw me not as family to be respected, but as a resource to be drained. After the initial confrontation, I retreated to my office, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief as I sat at my desk trying to process what had just happened. Lumayan. 300 gone. Not by accident, not through a banking error, but deliberately taken by my own family members who were now gaslighting me about it. I took several deep breaths, trying to think clearly through my options. The financial advisor in me immediately calculated the impact. This represented nearly 2 months of mortgage payments, or a significant portion of my emergency fund. While I could technically absorb the loss, it would set back several of my financial goals. More importantly, the breach of trust felt like a physical blow. A part of me wanted to call the police immediately. What Stephanie and Trevor had done was unequivocally credit card fraud, a felony that could result in serious charges, but another part hesitated. They were family. Trevor was just 12, heavily influenced by his mother, but still a child. Would involving law enforcement help him or push him further down a destructive path? I thought back to our childhood, to the countless times our parents had bailed Stephanie out of trouble without meaningful consequences. Their well-intentioned protection had only enabled her behavior, creating the entitled adult sitting in my kitchen, teaching her son that taking from others was justified if you wanted something badly enough. Was I perpetuating the same cycle by not immediately reporting the theft? Or was there a middle path? One that established firm boundaries while still preserving some chance of rebuilding our relationship. I decided to gather more information before making any drastic decisions. Opening my laptop, I logged into my home security system. I had installed cameras in the common areas of the house when I started my financial advisory business, primarily to protect client information. I rarely checked the footage, considering it mainly a deterrent, but now I was grateful for the foresight. Scanning back through yesterday's recordings, I found exactly what I feared. The living room camera showed Trevor not just taking my card from my office, but methodically photographing all the credit and debit cards in my wallet, carefully documenting both sides of each card with his phone. The kitchen camera caught him making phone calls while I was in my client meeting, reading off card numbers and verification codes. Even more disturbing, one clip showed Stephanie returning home much earlier than she'd claimed, examining the gaming equipment Trevor had purchased and helping him hide boxes in their room. They were clearly in this together. Trevor executing the plan, but Stephanie fully aware and complicit. The evidence was undeniable, and it cut through my indecision. This wasn't an impulsive childhood mistake. It was a calculated scheme. Still, before involving authorities, I wanted to give them one more chance to come clean and make amends. I organized the evidence I had gathered and called a family meeting in the living room that evening. Calmly and methodically, I presented the security footage, the transaction records, and the documented timeline of events. I'm giving you both an opportunity to explain, I said evenly after showing them the irrefutable evidence of their actions. I want to understand why you thought this was acceptable behavior. Stephanie's response was immediate and explosive. You've been spying on us. What kind of creep records his own family? That's a major invasion of privacy. Carl, it's my house. And those cameras were installed long before you moved in, I replied, refusing to be derailed. And they've now documented serious financial fraud. I'd like an explanation, not deflection. Oh, here we go with the my house power trip again. Stephanie sneered, always lording your success over everyone. You know what? I bet you're just making this up to kick us out because you're too selfish to help family in need. Trevor, taking cues from his mother, chimed in with rehearsed indignation. Yeah. Uncle Carl, you said I could use the card. It's not my fault you didn't say what for. I specifically said $10 for snacks at the corner store. I countered, maintaining my composure. That doesn't translate to thousands in gaming equipment and vacation plans. You know that. Trevor? Well, maybe if you weren't so stingy all the time. Stephanie interjected. We wouldn't have had to do this. Do you have any idea how hard it is to live here with your constant judgment? Trevor deserves some normal kid experiences. Normal kid experiences don't include credit card fraud, I said firmly. What you've taught him is that it's acceptable to steal when you want something you can't afford. That's setting him up for failure in life. Stephanie, Stephanie's face contorted with rage. Don't you dare question my parenting. Not everyone has had your privileges, Carl. Some of us have had to struggle. If you report this, I'll make sure the entire family knows how you've been abusing us, controlling every move, spying on us, denying basic necessities to a child. She stormed out of the room, slamming her bedroom door so hard that a framed photo fell from the wall, the glass shattering across the hardwood floor, a fitting metaphor for what was happening to our family relationship. Trevor lingered for a moment, and I thought I caught a flicker of shame in his eyes before it was replaced by the same defiant entitlement his mother displayed. He followed her without a word, slamming his door with equal force. The meeting had achieved nothing except to confirm what I already suspected. There would be no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no genuine remorse, and certainly no voluntary restitution. Stephanie was already preparing her narrative for the extended family, casting herself as the victim and me as the villain. Over the next few days, the situation deteriorated further. I discovered Stephanie had been using my home address to apply for new credit cards in her name. I found the mail before she did. 3 pre-approved credit cards with high interest rates and low initial limits, exactly the kind of predatory financial products that target people with poor credit histories. While cleaning up some clutter in the living room, I found a printout of my banking passwords in Trevor's backpack. He had apparently been watching me log in and had written down my credentials. Next to the passwords was a list of items with prices with Disney World trip, circled several times in red pen. The final straw came when I overheard Stephanie on the phone discussing their planned Florida trip in detail, mentioning they would leave before I figured out what was happening with the credit card. When I confronted her about the conversation, Trevor flew into a rage, throwing my laptop across the room and screaming that I was ruining everything. As I stared at my damaged computer containing all my client files and business records, something inside me hardened. This was no longer about the money. This was about enabling destructive behavior that would ultimately hurt Trevor far more than it hurt me. By allowing this to continue, I wasn't being kind. I was being complicit in teaching a child that actions don't have consequences. Stephanie's parting shot as she stormed away from our latest confrontation crystallized everything. If you weren't so stingy with your precious money, we wouldn't need to do this. Family is supposed to share what they have. In that moment, I knew exactly what I needed to do. That night, after Stephanie and Trevor had gone to bed, I sat alone in my darkened office, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on me. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant sound of Trevor snoring. My mind raced with conflicting emotions: betrayal, anger, disappointment, and underneath it all, a deep sadness for what our family relationship had become. I'd always believed that families should support each other, but somewhere along the way, that support had transformed into enabling destructive behavior. The truth I had to face was painful but clear. By continually rescuing Stephanie from the consequences of her actions, our family had contributed to creating the person who now felt entitled to steal from me and teach her son to do the Stephanie. Same? Real support meant establishing boundaries. Real love sometimes meant allowing people to face the natural consequences of their choices. And in this case, real responsibility meant protecting not just my finances, but also preventing Trevor from learning that theft and manipulation were acceptable life strategies. I picked up my phone and called Michael, a law school friend who now specialized in financial crimes. Despite the late hour, he answered, listening patiently as I outlined the situation without minimizing or excusing what had happened. Carl, this is textbook credit card fraud, Michael said after I finished. The fact that their family doesn't change the legal reality. What they've done carries potential felony charges, especially with the amount involved and the premeditation evident in the security footage. I don't necessarily want to press criminal charges, I explained, especially against Trevor. He's just a kid following his mother's example. I understand that, Michael replied. But you need to protect yourself both financially and legally. If you don't report this as fraud, you could be liable for those charges. And there's another consideration without formal consequences. What's to prevent them from doing this to someone else? We discussed options for nearly an hour, weighing legal, financial, and family considerations. By the time we hung up, I had a clear, multi-step plan that would protect my assets while potentially creating a necessary wake-up call for Stephanie and Trevor. The next morning, I left the house before dawn, telling myself this wasn't just about the money. It was about breaking a destructive cycle that would ultimately harm everyone involved, especially Trevor. My first stop was my bank, where I had an emergency appointment with the fraud department the moment they opened. The fraud specialist, a compassionate woman named Diane, reviewed the evidence I'd compiled: transaction records, security footage, and detailed notes of the conversations that followed. She didn't seem surprised. Apparently, family financial fraud was more common than most people realized. Unfortunately, Mr. Wilson, this is a clear-cut case of unauthorized use. She confirmed after reviewing everything, we'll need to file official reports to initiate the chargeback process and freeze the compromised accounts. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. What happens next? We'll issue you new cards with different numbers immediately. The fraud claims will be investigated, which typically takes 10 to 14 business days. During that time, we'll need to report this to the credit bureaus and possibly law enforcement depending on the outcome of our investigation and the charges. Will they be reversed? I asked, thinking about the financial impact in cases with this level of evidence. Yes, the charges should be reversed once the investigation confirms fraud. But I should warn you, this will necessarily involve documenting who made the unauthorized purchases. Are you prepared for that? I took a deep breath. Yes, I need to do what's right. Even if it's difficult, after completing the necessary paperwork at the bank, my next stop was my attorney's office, where we drafted a formal eviction notice, giving Stephanie and Trevor 30 days to vacate my property. It felt harsh, but after consulting with both legal and financial advisors, it was clear that continuing to house them created liability I couldn't afford both financially and emotionally. Back at home, I spent the afternoon in my locked office using my financial expertise to conduct a thorough investigation of accounts connected to my address. What I discovered was worse than I'd imagined. Stephanie had attempted to open several new credit accounts using my personal information, including a store credit card with a $6,000 limit and an auto loan application for a luxury vehicle using my professional connections. I placed fraud alerts on my credit reports with all three major bureaus, effectively preventing any new accounts from being opened without additional verification. I changed every password, security question, and access code for my financial accounts, email, and home security system. I ordered a locking mailbox to be installed the next day. As evening approached, I systematically worked through every card and account that might be compromised. I contacted each credit card company, explaining the situation and requesting immediate freezes for accounts where Stephanie might have gained access. I initiated security protocols to lock them down. I set up text alerts for any transaction over $20 on any of my accounts. Most critically, I traced the connections between my accounts and any that Stephanie had set up using my address. Though she couldn't access my accounts directly, she had created a web of financial ties that could potentially affect my credit and financial standing. I severed these connections, documenting everything meticulously for both legal protection and potential insurance claims. The work was exhausting, but necessary. By midnight, I had secured my financial perimeter, but there was still one critical step remaining: ensuring that the cards Stephanie and Trevor thought they could use were completely inaccessible. Using the bank's emergency protocols, I froze every card connected to their unauthorized purchases, not just my compromised cards, but also any new cards Stephanie had applied for using my address. The system would flag and deny any attempt to use these cards, regardless of the amount or location. For accounts that couldn't be completely frozen immediately, I reduced the available credit to zero or placed special monitoring that would decline any new charges while allowing existing automatic payments to process, protecting my warm credit score while preventing further abuse. The final piece was the most difficult: documenting everything for potential legal proceedings. I gathered all evidence: photos, videos, transaction records, conversation, and uploaded them to a secure cloud storage, sending copies to both my attorney and financial advisor for safekeeping. It was nearly 2:00 the morning when I finished. The house was silent as I locked away the physical financial documents in my fireproof safe and secured my office. Walking past the guest room where Stephanie and Trevor slept blissfully unaware of the financial fortress I had just built around my accounts, I felt a strange sense of calm replace the anger and betrayal that had driven me through the hardest day. This wasn't revenge. It was protection. It wasn't punishment. It was boundary setting. And perhaps if they were willing to learn from it, it might be the first step toward genuine accountability and change. I finally went to bed around 3:00, setting my alarm for 6:00 to ensure I would be awake when reality struck. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized that tomorrow would change our family dynamic forever. For better or worse, there was no going back. The shrill beep of my alarm pulled me from a restless sleep. At exactly 6:00, I silenced it quickly and lay still for a moment, listening to the quiet house. Though physically exhausted from only 3 hours of sleep, my mind was surprisingly alert, braced for what was coming. Rather than getting up immediately, I reached for my phone and opened the security camera app, switching to the live feed of the hallway and kitchen. Though I felt slightly uncomfortable, essentially spying on my sister and nephew, yesterday's discoveries had eliminated any remaining trust. I needed to see their genuine reactions, not the performance they would put on once they knew I was watching. For nearly 15 minutes, nothing happened. Then, right on schedule, Stephanie emerged from the guest room in her bathrobe, hair disheveled from sleep. This was her normal routine. She always checked her phone first thing in the morning, usually scrolling through social media, and I now realized her banking apps to plan the day's spending. She shuffled to the kitchen, poured herself coffee, and settled at the table. I watched as she picked up her phone, tapping the screen with the casual confidence of someone who expected everything to be normal. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Her body language changed abruptly, tensing as she tapped more urgently at the screen, her face transforming from sleepy indifference to confused panic. She tried another app, then another, her movements becoming increasingly frantic. When she attempted to make a purchase based on her familiar pattern of taps, the rejection was evident in how she slammed the phone down on the table, picking it up again immediately to try a different card. After the fourth failed attempt, it happened, a blood-curdling scream that seemed to shake the walls of the house, followed by a stream of profanities that would make a sailor blush. Trevor, get out here now. She shrieked loud enough that I didn't need the security feed to hear it. Seconds later, Trevor stumbled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. What's happening? The cards aren't working. None of them. Everything's frozen. Stephanie's voice was shrill with panic and rage. Did you do something stupid? Did you try to buy something too big that flagged the account? Trevor's face fell as he processed his mother's words. What? No. I only bought what you said was okay. They frantically checked multiple accounts, their panic growing with each failed attempt. Stephanie made several calls to banks, but I knew what she would hear. Accounts flagged for fraud investigation. No transactions possible. Please visit your local branch with identification for further assistance. The realization dawned on them simultaneously. This wasn't a technical glitch. This was deliberate. As one, their heads turned toward my bedroom door. On the security feed, I watched Stephanie's expression transform from panic to fury as she stormed down the hallway, pounding on my door with both fists. "Carl, open this door right now. What did you do?" Each word was punctuated by another bang on the door. "I know you're in there. Open up." I took a deep breath, set down my phone, and opened the door, facing my sister's unfiltered rage directly. Her face was contorted, her eyes wild, her bathrobe askew from her violent approach to my door. "What the hell did you do to our accounts?" she demanded. Attempting to push past me into my room, I stood my ground, blocking the entrance. "I didn't do anything to your account, Stefania. I protected mine from fraud. There's a difference. You froze everything. We can't access any money. How are we supposed to live?" Her voice cracked with a mixture of anger and what sounded almost like fear. "The same way most people do, honestly," I replied calmly. "The cards you were using were obtained fraudulently, using my personal information and address. The banks have been notified, and the fraudulent charges are being investigated." "You reported us to the banks." Her voice rose to a shriek. "Your own family. How could you?" I reported unauthorized transactions, which is exactly what they were. I corrected her. "What did you expect would happen?" "Stephanie, that I'd just absorb a $6,000 theft and pretend everything was fine." Trevor had joined his mother in the hallway, his face pale. "But those were supposed to work for at least another week. We checked everything." His inadvertent admission hung in the air between us. Stephanie shot him a warning look. But it was too late. "At least you're being honest now," I said to Trevor. "Yes. Fraudulent cards typically work until they're reported. They've been reported." Stephanie's tactics shifted instantly from rage to manipulation, her expression softening as tears filled her eyes. "Carl, please. We're going through such a hard time. Trevor needs stability. I was going to pay you back everything once I got back on my feet. You know I would never intentionally hurt you. Like you paid back the $3,000 from last year, or the security deposit from the apartment before that, or the car loan from 5 years ago." I countered. "This pattern has to stop, Stephanie. It's not helping you, and it's teaching Trevor destructive habits that will follow him into adulthood." Her facade crumbled as quickly as it had appeared, rage returning full force. "Fine. Be that way. I'm calling Mom and Dad. Let's see what they think about you throwing their grandson out on the street." "Go ahead," I said, surprised by my own calmness. "I've already spoken with them." This was a bluff. I hadn't yet contacted our parents, but I knew Stephanie's playbook. She always ran to them when cornered. Spinning situations to cast herself as the victim, she pulled out her phone and stormed back to the guest room. Already dialing, Trevor lingered in the hallway, looking uncertain for the first time since this began. "What's going to happen to us?" he asked quietly, sounding suddenly like the 1-2-year-old he was, rather than the entitled accomplice of the past few days. Before I could answer, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and felt a grim satisfaction. It was exactly who I expected. "I need to take this," I told Trevor, stepping back into my room and closing the door. I answered the call professionally. "Carl Wilson speaking." "Mr. Wilson, this is Martin Edwards from the Fraud Investigation Department at First National Bank. We're calling regarding the claims you filed yesterday." Stephanie must have overheard through the door because she emerged from the guest room, phone still at her ear. Likely, with our parents listening, she hovered nearby, trying to hear both sides of my conversation. "Yes, Mr. Edwards, thank you for calling so promptly," I replied, making no effort to lower my voice. "We've reviewed the initial evidence you provided and I wanted to inform you that we've escalated this case due to the amount involved and the clear pattern of activity as per our légale obligation. We've notified local authorities about potential criminal fraud. Stephanie's face drained of color as she heard this. Trevor, who had been lingering in the hallway, began to cry. Not the manipulative tears he'd used before, but genuine frightened sobs. I understand. I said to the bank representative, what happens next? An officer may contact you to take a formal statement. The unauthorized charges will be reversed within 3 to 5 business days once you've signed the affidavit we've emailed you. Given the family relationship involved, you should be aware that this could potentially result in criminal charges. Do you understand and wish to proceed with the fraud claim? I looked directly at Stephanie as I answered. Yes, I understand, and yes, I wish to proceed. As I ended the call, our parents' voices could be heard squawking from Stephanie's phone, asking what was happening. She had gone completely pale, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. You actually did it, she whispered. You reported us to the police. I reported fraud to my bank. I corrected her, which is what it was. The bank is required by law to report potential criminal activity. These are the natural consequences of your actions. Stefania. But they could arrest me. They could take Trevor away. Her voice cracked with genuine fear now. That's possible, I acknowledged. Actions have consequences. Something you've been shielded from for far too long. Our confrontation was interrupted by the sharp ring of my cell phone. The caller ID displayed Mom and Dad, and I took a deep breath before answering and putting it on speaker. Carl, what on earth is going on? My mother's concerned voice filled the hallway. Stephanie says you've frozen her accounts and called the police on them. This must be some kind of misunderstanding. And so began the next phase of this painful family reckoning, one that would ultimately change all of our lives forever. The conversation with our parents that morning was one of the most difficult I'd ever experienced. For nearly an hour, I stood in my hallway with the phone on speaker, methodically explaining everything that had happened while Stephanie alternated between sobbing, shouting accusations, and making desperate attempts to minimize what she and Trevor had done. It was just a misunderstanding. She kept insisting. Carl gave Trevor permission to use the card for $10 of snacks. I reminded her, not thousands in electronics and vacation plans. Our father, always, the more pragmatic parent, asked pointed questions about the evidence I had. When I mentioned the security footage of Trevor photographing all my cards and Stephanie helping hide the purchased items, a heavy silence fell on the other end of the line. Oh, Stefania, our mother finally said, her voice thick with disappointment. What were you thinking? I was thinking about giving my son some normal experiences. Stephanie shot back. Carl has all this money and this big house. While we have nothing, he could have helped us. But instead, he's been judging us and making us feel like charity cases. By stealing from him, our father asked quietly, that's how you solve problems now. And you involve Trevor in this? The conversation continued in painful circles until finally our father made a decision. We're driving up there today. This needs to be handled in person. Carl, can you hold off on any further legal action until we arrive? I agreed on the condition that Stephanie and Trevor surrender any remaining items purchased with my cards and provide a complete accounting of everything they had taken. Our parents would arrive by evening, a 4-hour drive from their retirement community. The rest of the day passed in uncomfortable silence. Stephanie and Trevor remained in the guest room, occasionally emerging for food or bathroom breaks, avoiding eye contact. I worked in my office, catching up on client emails I'd neglected during yesterday's financial lockdown. Around 6:00 that evening, my parents arrived, looking older and more tired than when I'd last seen them at Christmas. My mother hugged me tightly before doing the same to Stephanie and Trevor, who had emerged at the sound of their arrival. My father, always more reserved, gave me a firm handshake that communicated both support and concern. We gathered in the living room, an impromptu family summit to address what had happened and determine a path forward. My mother had brought a folder of papers, ever the organized one, and I realized they had spent their drive preparing for this conversation. "Before we begin," my father said, his voice carrying the authority it had held throughout our childhood, "I want to make something very clear. What happened here was wrong. Stefania. Trevor, taking someone else's money without permission is stealing. There's no other word for it." Stephanie started to protest, but he held up his hand. "I'm not finished. Your mother and I have enabled this behavior for too long, always stepping in to fix your messes. Stephanie, we thought we were helping, but clearly we weren't. That stops today." My mother opened her folder. "We've come up with a plan, but everyone needs to agree to it. The alternative is letting the legal process take its course, which could mean criminal charges." She looked directly at Stephanie. "We don't want that for you or for Trevor, but we will not shield you from consequences anymore." The plan they proposed was comprehensive. Stephanie would enter a structured financial counseling program with regular check-ins and accountability. She would find a job, any job, within 2 weeks, and begin making regular restitution payments to me. She would attend weekly therapy sessions to address the underlying issues driving her behavior. For Trevor, there would be both consequences and support. 20 hours of community service arranged through a youth program. My father had connected with regular meetings with a counselor specializing in adolescence. A strictly monitored allowance system to teach financial responsibility. Most importantly, a heartfelt written apology to me, along with working to pay back his portion of the stolen funds through age-appropriate chores and jobs, and you'll be moving out of Carl's house," my father added firmly. "We found an apartment in a decent area that accepts tenants with credit issues. It's small, but it's safe. Your mother and I will cover the security deposit and first month's rent, but after that, you're responsible for your own housing costs." Stephanie's eyes widened. "But how am I supposed to afford that? I don't even have a job yet." "Then you'd better find one quickly," my mother replied with uncharacteristic firmness. "The apartment is available next week. We've signed a 6-month lease in our names with strict conditions for you to follow." I was surprised by my parents' thoroughness and resolve. For the first time, they weren't just bailing Stephanie out. They were establishing a structured path toward actual change with real accountability. "And if I refuse?" Stephanie challenged, though her voice lacked conviction. My father's expression was grave. "Then Carl proceeds with the fraud claims and you face whatever legal consequences follow. Your mother and I will not interfere. We love you, but we won't enable this destructive behavior anymore." The reality of the situation finally seemed to penetrate Stephanie's defenses. Her shoulders slumped and she nodded silently. Trevor, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the meeting, suddenly spoke up. "What about Dad? Does he know about this?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. I hadn't considered James's role in all this, but obviously, as Trevor's father, he needed to be informed. "We contacted him this afternoon," my mother said gently. "He's understandably upset, but he's agreed to be part of the solution. In fact, he's offered to have you stay with him more regularly. Trevor, while your mom gets back on her feet." This news seemed to affect Stephanie more than anything else that had been said. The prospect of losing time with her son, the one person she truly loved, despite her flawed parenting, finally broke through her remaining defenses. "I didn't mean for things to go this far," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I just wanted Trevor to have nice things, to not feel like we were failures all the time. Material things don't make you a success or a failure," my father said gently. "The choices you make, how you treat others, your integrity, those are what matter." We spent the next several hours working through the details of the plan. My parents had thought of everything: transportation to work and therapy, appointments to a budget for the apartment, even arrangements for Trevor's school transfer if necessary. They had contacted resources in the community for both financial counseling and family therapy. For my part, I agreed to withhold further legal action as long as the plan was followed and restitution payments were made consistently. I would work with the bank to explain that we were handling the matter privately, though I was honest about the possibility that they might still pursue action of their own. As the evening wore on, I had a moment alone with Trevor while my parents discussed apartment details with Stephanie. He sat on the couch looking smaller and younger than he had in months. "I'm really sorry, Uncle Carl," he said quietly without prompting. "Mom said it was okay that you owed us because you had more money. But I knew it was wrong when we were doing it." "Why did you go along with it?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. He shrugged, staring at his shoes. "Mom gets really upset when I don't agree with her. And I wanted that gaming stuff. All my friends have it. You know, Trevor, the stuff doesn't matter nearly as much as you think it does." I told him, "What matters is who you become as a person. Do you want to be someone who takes from others or someone people can trust?" He thought about this for a long moment. "I want people to trust me." He finally said, "Do you think you'll ever trust me again?" "Uncle Carl," the question caught me off guard with its sincerity. "Trust has to be rebuilt," I explained. "It'll take time and consistent actions that show you've changed. But yes, I think that's possible." When my parents left that night, they took Stephanie and Trevor with them to stay at a hotel until the apartment was ready. The house felt strangely empty after they were gone, but there was also a sense of peace, of boundaries finally established and respected. As I locked up for the night, I noticed something on the kitchen counter. A handwritten note from Trevor. It wasn't the formal apology that would come later as part of his consequences, but something he'd written on his own initiative. "Uncle Carl," it read in messy 1-2-year-old handwriting. "I'm sorry for stealing from you. I know it was wrong. I'm going to work hard to pay you back. Even if it takes a long time, thank you for not calling the police on us. I'm going to try to be better. Trevor." It wasn't a perfect resolution. There would be difficult days ahead. Setbacks and frustrations as Stephanie struggled with changing lifelong patterns, but for the first time, I felt cautiously hopeful that real change might be possible. Not just for Stephanie and Trevor, but for our entire family dynamic. 6 months passed more quickly than I expected, bringing changes I never imagined possible. When I stood staring at my banking app that fateful morning, the journey wasn't smooth or easy. There were setbacks, arguments, and moments when the old patterns threatened to reemerge, but the transformation in my family was unmistakable. Stephanie found a job at a local insurance office within the 3-week deadline my parents set. It wasn't glamorous or particularly well-paying, but it was stable with regular hours and the potential for advancement if she proved reliable. To everyone's surprise, including perhaps her own, she excelled in the structured environment. Her natural charm and people skills, previously channeled into manipulation, became assets in a legitimate setting. 3 months in, she received her first small raise and the responsibility of training new hires. The apartment my parents arranged was modest. A 2-bedroom unit in a working-class neighborhood with decent schools and public transportation. After years of living beyond her means, Stephanie initially complained about everything from the outdated kitchen to the lack of in-unit laundry. But as weeks passed, something unexpected happened. She began taking pride in making the space her own, scouring thrift stores for affordable decorations and learning basic DIY skills from YouTube videos. Most importantly, she maintained perfect attendance at both financial counseling and therapy sessions. The financial counselor helped her create her first realistic budget, while her therapist addressed the deeper issues. Her sense of entitlement, her tendency to blame others for her problems, and the insecurity driving her materialistic values. Trevor spent more time with James, completed his community service at a local animal shelter, and eventually continued volunteering there because he genuinely enjoyed helping abandoned animals. He began repaying me in small amounts earned from dog walking, lawn mowing, and weekend work at the shelter. Those payments mattered less for their value than for what they represented. Responsibility, accountability, change. My relationship with both of them rebuilt slowly. I never pretended the theft had not happened, and I never returned to the old pattern of rescuing Stephanie financially. Instead, trust was earned through consistent actions. My parents changed as well, finally recognizing that decades of bailing Stephanie out had contributed to her inability to accept consequences. They attended family therapy and learned to support her without enabling her. By Thanksgiving, our family gathered again under completely different circumstances. Stephanie raised her glass and thanked everyone for refusing to give up on her, while also refusing to rescue her from the consequences of her choices. Trevor apologized again and acknowledged that what he had done was wrong. Neither apology erased the past, but both reflected genuine growth. Over time, I realized the $6,300 theft had forced all of us to confront patterns we had ignored for years. Stephanie had mistaken material possessions for security and success. Trevor had learned from her that taking what you wanted could be justified if someone else had more. My parents had confused rescuing their daughter with loving her, and I had spent years avoiding confrontation because maintaining superficial family peace seemed easier than establishing uncomfortable boundaries. The crisis changed all of that. I continued protecting my finances carefully, but I also discovered healthier ways to use what I had. I began mentoring young people interested in finance, volunteering with financial literacy programs, and establishing a small scholarship for first-generation college students. My relationship with Trevor became particularly meaningful. During one hike, he asked if I was still angry about what happened. I told him I wasn't angry anymore. I had been hurt and disappointed, but I had also seen how hard he and his mother were working to change. Trevor explained that his counselor had taught him understanding why someone behaves badly does not make the behavior acceptable. That simple insight captured everything I had learned. Healing did not require pretending the harm never happened. Forgiveness did not require abandoning boundaries. Love did not mean protecting people from every consequence. Sometimes the most loving response was the one that forced everyone involved to face reality. The $6,300 was eventually reversed through the fraud process. But the real recovery had nothing to do with the money. What mattered was that Stephanie finally learned to support herself. Trevor learned that trust and integrity were worth more than expensive possessions. My parents stopped enabling destructive behavior, and I learned that boundaries were not cruelty. They were protection. The experience taught me that healthy family relationships are built the same way healthy finances are built, through small, consistent choices made over time. Honesty instead of manipulation. Accountability instead of excuses. Respect instead of entitlement. Support instead of enabling. 6 months earlier, I had looked at my banking app and thought I had lost $6,300 overnight. In reality, that moment exposed a much larger problem and forced our family to address it. The money could be recovered. Trust took longer, but through accountability, therapy, work, restitution, and consistent effort, even that began to return. I still check my accounts every morning over coffee. Old habits die hard. But now, alongside the numbers reflecting my financial health, I also take stock of something far more valuable: relationships built on honesty, respect, and appropriate boundaries rather than exploitation or resentment. It turns out that's the most important balance sheet of all.